ICQ Podcast episode 475, expanding portable ops on 77s and 2 meters. Hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts and welcome to episode 475 of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported by Jeremy Reese, November 8 Yankee Papa, John R. Stengel, Whiskey 8 Uniform Charlie, and of course our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode we're joined by Martin M1MRB, Dan KB6 November Uniform, Caryn KD2 Golf Uniform Tango, and Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, along with Ed DD5 Lima Papa, to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BLY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is expanding portable ops on 77s and 2 meters. Well, as always, it's your very kind generosity that shows the value you see from the ICQ podcast and the donations you send to express that value that keeps us advert free and paying our way in producing your show for you every fortnight. So we'd like to first thank Jeremy, November 8 Yankee Papa, who says he really enjoys the podcast and appreciates all the work that goes into it. After taking a pause on the hobby, it's helped him become active and catch up. So thanks a lot, Jeremy, and say great to have you back with us in the hobby. And John Stengel, Whiskey 8 Uniform Charlie, says thank you for the great podcast. So thanks, guys, for your one-off donation. As I say, those donations, along with the one-off and the monthly and subscription donations, what they do is they go into paying our way, keep us advert free, and giving you honest opinions in the amateur radio community. If you find value in what we do, we ask you to go to ICQPodcast.com/donate, where you can express that value you receive in a monetary figure that helps out along our way. Please do listen to the end of the show, where at the end of the show where Martin and I will be wrapping up the show. We'll be giving you news about our first manufacturer Q&A and also promoting to you the first digital talk group nets of 2026. However, we've got the news roundtable coming up, so we're going to join Martin, Dan, Caryn, Edmund and Ed to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including the biggest solar storm in 20 years and 77 axis Limbo. As always, hope you enjoy.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to the ICQ Podcast News Roundtable for episode 475. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Hello, folks.
Yeah, great to have you. I've also got your side of the pond, Caryn Eve Murray KD2GUT, and I'm still getting your call sign right, Caryn. I mean, this is unbelievable. I haven't put you a call sign in the UK for a long time.
I think I've got to go for my UK call sign and make a soothsayer out of you, Martin. Hello, listeners. Happy 2026. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Caryn. Well, you could get a UK call sign because I've got a US one, but in fairness, you get 90 days on your licence. Unless you're going to be in the UK for more than 90 days, it's probably not worth doing. Down on the south coast, about 50 miles from me, we have Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hiya. And I take it the weather's been quite wet today.
Just a bit, yes. It's been absolutely horrible on the south coast.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty much horrible the whole of the south of England. Anyway, going over to Germany, we have Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP. Ed, good evening, and hopefully the weather hasn't been too bad for you.
Yeah, good evening. No, we've had a bit of a lull between the snow and cold. It's been actually up to about 5 or 6 degrees today, but it's heading back down after the weekend to about -9, -10 for some days. So there's more winter to come yet over this side. Back to you, Martin.
That worries me, Ed, because I don't like the cold. But hey hum, and it's nice and hot in Germany with frigates halving time, so that's always good. Okay, first news story. There's been another massive or a big solar storm, and one of the biggest in 20 years to hit this Earth. It's happening pretty much just before this podcast goes out, but those of you listening on Sunday, you might see some remnants of it. Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, well, this came as somewhat of a surprise on Tuesday or Monday night into Tuesday, with the K index going up to 9 or even over 9. And basically, it was a major storm that's also caused HF RF blackouts in some parts of the world. And yeah, today looking around on the bands, hardly anybody on, or the people who are on are quite local to me. Almost as if somebody's turned the bands off with a big switch. Yeah, we record on a Wednesday evening, so we've had a couple of days of this, and it's even going to go on. It's probably going to get back to normal by Friday, but it just shows whatever predictions you make, if the sun gets angry at you, you've got no chance. Some amateurs will like it because you get a lot of aurora, and those that use aurora to reflect VHF signals be having fun at the moment. And in fact, the aurora has been visible a lot further south than it usually would be. So lots of lights in the sky. But for HF operators, not good news at the moment. But, you know, we wanted to cover this in this edition because it's actually happening now. And of course, for many, many amateurs, this is the HF, that use HF. It's actually a bit of a downtime, but it'll get back to normal. And over to you, Martin.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I've missed it so far. My daughter-in-law in Ireland, she lives in Waterford, which is the southern part of Ireland, quite almost on the coast of the south down there. They've seen it, the aurora, so last couple of days. So it has come a long way south. Edmund, have you spotted it?
Well, talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've been working very long days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of this week. And on Tuesday afternoon in the office, my Google Android phone was making rather a lot of pinging noises because I've got the free Aurora Watch app on there. And it was sending me notifications very regularly. Anything above 100 nanoteslas is classed as a major storm in progress, and at one point it was up over 1100. So if you're interested in that, it's well worth downloading that app. Incidentally, if you've got Simon's World Map on your Windows PC, which is a great freeware program that I would recommend to everybody, irrespective of whether they're interested in Aurora or not. If you've got that program downloaded, there is a box you can tick that will superimpose the Aurora on top of the map, and that was coming very far south on Tuesday in particular. So I left the office about 9 o'clock in the evening and thought, well, I'm walking back to the car, which is a good 45 minute walk. I thought, I can look up at the sky and I might be able to see the aurora with the naked eye. And of course, it was cloudy, it was rainy, it was windy, it was horrible, and not a chance of seeing anything. So to answer your question, Martin, no, I didn't see it with the naked eye. And I just haven't turned the radio on at all to hear the effects. I know Ed said a moment ago that it was having quite a marked effect on the HF bands. Well, a couple of hours ago, before we started recording, I did turn on and have a listen on 40 meters. There were a reasonable number of SSB signals on there. The band wasn't rammed, but equally it wasn't completely empty in the way that I thought it might have been. And last but not least, one of the great things about amateur radio is that because we've got so many bands across a very wide frequency range, that if something like this happens that takes out HF, you have the possibility of making lots of DX contacts via auroral propagation, not just on VHF actually. You can do it on 10 meters. And in fact, when the last major storm happened, I didn't make any contacts, but I did hear quite a few SSB QSOs via Aurora on 10 meters, and the Doppler effect is a lot less on that band than it is up at VHF. So whilst you might struggle to actually work out what anybody was saying on 2 meters via SSB, auroral propagation. If you listen to an SSB contact on 10 meters via the aurora, then yes, it's got a very peculiar sound and gives everybody a sort of gravelly sounding voice, but you can at least work out what they're saying most of the time. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, sounds like you had fun, mate. Sounds like you had fun. Dan, does it happen in your part of the world? I assume it does, or are you too far south for it?
Oh, no, for sure. I was hoping to be able to see it actually last night, but it was too cloudy here. There's just no way to see it. But just like the others have mentioned, there's been hardly any activity on the CW portions of the band. I did manage to eke out one really poor contact last night, but after that, I called CQ for maybe almost an hour and got no response. So, yeah, it's definitely a thing here. The one contact I did have, you could tell there was some auroral effect there. I mean, it certainly wasn't the nice pure CW tone I'm used to hearing, and so yeah, it's amazing. It's kind of amazing that the effect we had, that this storm is having on HF propagation.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. Now, Caryn, I know you say you live in New York, but you don't live in the city. You live in the state of New York. Do you suffer with light pollution like I do? Because I live in the south of London and there's so much light pollution around here, you probably wouldn't see it anyway.
Yeah, Martin, we do get light pollution on nights when we don't have light pollution. As luck has had it, we've just had a cloudy evening. One time during the aurora of a year and a half ago, we actually drove out to the waterfront to try to catch some aurora. And of course, it was amazing. There were people lined up looking north. It's like the whole village had come out to look, but nothing could be seen. I'm seeing a lot of posts on social media, people who have been making some interesting contacts using the aurora, and I envy them. That's rather nice. For those of us who have been participating in Straight Key Month for the Straight Key Century Club, it became a very lonely experience when this hit. And this is a solar radiation storm. That's the type of activity this is. It's called a solar radiation storm. It basically meant for me that if I heard anything, the dits and the das were immensely distorted. That is, if I heard anything at all above the noise was quite high. So this has really brought a lot of things to a screeching halt for some of us. And that's a shame, because the Straight Key Month is so much fun. But anybody calling CQ, anybody, as Dan said, you call CQ, you take your chances. I did try a few contacts on 6 meters, but there was just nothing to be had. So we'll tough it out. Again, by the time this podcast is being heard, the worst will be over. So Straight Key Month will continue, and life will go on. Back to you, Martin.
Well, there you go. So say, interesting from what all of you have said. Nice to look up at the sky and see it, but it has seemed to have killed the bands off on HF, particularly at the moment. But as I say, unfortunately, I live in South London and there's masses of light pollution, so I very rarely see these things. Well, most things, not only the aurora, but one day I'll get to see it. Right, let's move to our next news story. Dan, you put this one up. Interesting story. Amateur radio is in the news. Can hams help Taiwan survive? Repeaters now solar-powered? Ham radio connects. We talk about ham radio, but around the world there's a lot going on in other countries that they're using ham radio probably more than we are. What do you think, Dan?
Well, this is an interesting story because, China is really down on Taiwan, and, to say the least. And the Taiwanese are getting very inventive with how they might cope with this. And regularly their cables, which connect them to the rest of the world, are getting cut. And there's a question of who's actually doing that or how that's happening. But they're looking for ways to get around that, and they think ham radio might be a possibility. Of course, it's you can't reach the levels of data rates that you can with cables, but yeah, it's a thing. We don't think about that here in the United States because our internet service is so good, but Taiwan is a whole different matter.
Yeah, lots of other countries around the world have different infrastructure than what we've become used to in the US and the UK. So, yeah, it's not always as good as we've got, but they make do what they have. Caryn, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, hams to the rescue. That's always the case. And this is indeed the case. If communication is down for whatever the reason, you do want to rely on amateur radio, unless there's a solar storm, of course, but that doesn't come along quite as often. There is a ham radio community that already exists in Taiwan. So, and there are call signs I'm sure people have in Logbook of the World recorded that they've made contacts there. But apparently, this effort, which is being spearheaded by Civil Defense Group, is looking to get more hams. You cannot have enough amateur radio operators. We certainly have a lot of these training sessions going on here in the States in areas that have their own challenges, be it wildfires, be it threat of earthquake. But in this case, with Taiwan facing, for whatever reason, the cutoff of the cables, it's very isolating. So this group has taken upon themselves to get people licensed, in this case specifically for the purpose of keeping the lines of communication open, letting people get in touch with one another, and anything that can increase the amateur radio population, in my opinion, is a good thing. So we'll see what we hear from Taiwan in the months ahead when they sit the exam. When I put this story into Newsline, which will be coming out, by the time listeners hear this, Newsline will be out already. I did attempt to get an up-to-date count on how many hams already are active in Taiwan and what the population is as a baseline. So when these new hams come online, we can see how successful this training effort is. But the Radio League there did not respond to me, at least not in time for our deadline. Hopefully, I'll hear from them at some point. If they're listening, please respond to my email. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I agree with you, Caryn, that the more hams in the world, the better the place will be. And yeah, but our hobby's a very sociable hobby, so some of the bad things that go on in the world could very well be cut back a bit if we were more sociable to each other. Edmund, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, my first thought was that if Taiwan is up against an outfit, whether that's the Chinese military or indeed anybody else that has the capability and wherewithal to cut or damage underseas cables, then if they're capable of doing that, they ought to be more than capable of putting a few components together in a box with a battery and sighting it somewhere near a repeater site and completely jamming and overpowering the input frequency. Things like that were going on in the UK decades ago by individuals who had nowhere near the training or the resources of a national military organisation. So, yes, it's good if amateur radio can help. If I were in Taiwan and my back was against the wall, I'd don't think I would be using FM. I certainly wouldn't be using repeaters. I think, assuming we were talking fixed point-to-point communications, I would probably be using something like CW, which I know isn't a cipher and I know it isn't encrypted, but far fewer people in the world know how to read CW than those who don't know how to read it. And I think I would be going for something like very low power on 23 centimetres, but into very long and highly directional Yagis with narrow bore sights, which hopefully would avoid detection by sort of casual eavesdroppers, as it were. So yeah, it's a good news story in one way, but I'm really not sure that repeaters is the thing to be relying on, solar powered or otherwise. Back to you, Martin.
Well, you got to start somewhere, Edmund. You got to start somewhere. So, in fairness, if this group is setting up to be a backbone data provider or helping the community by getting messages from, say, one village to another if the whole infrastructure goes down, that sort of thing. I mean, it really depends on what they're trying to do. I'm guessing at this point in time that they're talking about moving information between villages. And as time goes on, they will probably look to do some of the things you've suggested. So, in fairness, I think it's a good news story because it's involving amateurs and giving amateurs something interesting to do. So I like it. Right, move to our next news story. The UK regulator eyes frequency sharing by devices. Now, this isn't an amateur radio story as such, but we spotted this on the last episode of the traders using HF frequencies, and they've dropped down into the amateur frequencies. So is this a sign of the times? Is it going to happen again to us all? Ed, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I can do. This particular example, they're talking about the 6 gigahertz band, sharing it between Wi-Fi and cell phones, which in a lot of ways makes a lot of sense with the fact that you can also do Wi-Fi calling from most cell phones or most smartphones these days. So combining them is, in principle, not a bad idea. How you control who picks up the actual frequency and how long before they run out of the channels is an interesting question. But it's what's behind, the principle behind this is why we've included this, I think, because what it's saying to me is there's a lot of commercial interest in getting more frequencies up in the UHF and SHF areas, in the microwave areas. And obviously the policy from Ofcom now is, well, we'll share bands to fulfill our customers' needs. And how much further a step is it for them to then say, okay, the 23 centimeter amateur band, okay, the amateurs are only secondary users, okay, you can now share it with some company using wideband modulation control systems across cities to control their electricity supplies or meter temperatures or run the traffic lights or whatever. It's not a big step to say, okay, we're sharing the 6 gigahertz band. Now we're going to share one of the amateurs bands with commercial users, and of course, who will get priority then. So, I mean, I think that's the reasoning behind us including this in here. At the moment, this is not an amateur band that's affected. It's actually above the amateur band, but once the principle is in place that they say, well, technically we can share different users on the same band, I think we need to watch out that we don't get pushed out of some of the microwave bands. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ed, on that. We make investment out of our own pocket to transmit on the bands we're given. If they then take them away from us, it's a bit of a pain. But the other thing is, this is happening in the UK. If it's happening in the UK, it isn't going to be long before it'll happen in other parts of the world. They'll look at it and go, well, the UK didn't have a problem, we'll try it in our country. And a lot of this equipment is fairly standard across the world for RF and bits and pieces, all right? And the only major difference in lots of countries is the AC power supply. But in fairness, this could be a worrier, in my opinion. Dan, what's your thoughts?
So, we do already share some bands, right? And so I think this kind of thing is inevitable. And I think we're just going to have to learn to live with it, is my opinion. In some cases, we're actually the primary users, right? And here in the U.S., some of the Wi-Fi channels are located in an amateur band, and amateur radio operators are the primary users of that frequency, those frequencies, for us that's a benefit. There's a story where some manufacturer somewhere was using some of those channels, and they were getting all kinds of quote unquote interference from hams, and as it turns out, since hams have the primary use in that band, the manufacturer had to change the way their Wi-Fi was set up. So I just think this is going to happen more and more often, and we're going to have to get used to it and figure out ways to coexist.
I think you're right, and I think at the end of the day, guys, money talks. If a big internet group wants our frequencies, they'll pay more. They'll pay money for it, and us amateurs get allocated frequencies. We don't actually pay for them as such. So, in fairness, as much as I hope that they don't encroach into the amateur bands, we don't have a lot of choice if somebody goes and sticks a lot of money down and says they want to do that. And if one router manufacturer or one switch or one access point is using 6 gigs in the UK, they'll be made somewhere where they'll use the same frequencies worldwide. So even if this is happening in the UK, I don't think it'll be long after the initial tests and bits and pieces in the UK that it won't migrate all around the world. So there you go. As I say, manufacturing costs of building things as well. If you're going to build radio devices for the internet, then you don't want to have multiple different transmitting frequencies in different countries. So, we'll keep an eye on this one, see how it goes. Okay, moving to our next news story. German amateurs. Access to 7 meg band is in limbo. Now, this is probably the only one that Ed and I are going to be interested in, but we're still going to kick it around. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Well, before everybody panics, Martin should have said 70 megahertz, not 7 megahertz. We still have access to 40 meters here in Germany, but as of January the 1st, or as of midnight on December 31st, the 70 megahertz 4 meter band is no longer available to amateurs. The history of this is that originally both the 50 megahertz 6 meter and the 70 megahertz 4 meter allocations were done on a temporary basis. That means they weren't actually allocated to amateurs on a primary or a secondary basis. Rather, they were permitted for use. In other words, temporary. And the temporary authorizations were usually 1 year long. And from 1 year to the next, the amount of space on 4 meters given increased a little bit, but generally it's still not the complete 4 meter band that the UK and most other European countries have. It's just a small piece of 70 megahertz. And at the end of each year, the regulator, BNetzA, Bundesnetzagentur, would normally extend the permissions. In the case of 4 meters, that hasn't happened. Now, I'm hoping this is purely an oversight, and in their next meeting, which I believe is in February, it might get sorted out. Related to this is also 6 meters. And again, it used to be allocated on a year-to-year basis. As long as you don't cause any interference or anything, we'll keep renewing it. However, from the middle of, not last year, hang on, which year are we in? We're in, from June 2024, Class A licensees, so the full license, were allowed access to the 50 to 52 megahertz 6 meter band as a permanent allocation. So that's now an amateur band. Secondary user status, I believe, in part of the band, but in any case, permanently allocated. In addition to that, the middle license, the Class E or novice, the equivalent of intermediate in the UK or standard in Australia or general in the US, were given then from June 2024, temporary access on the basis that if you cause any interference or anything, you will not be renewed. And that seems to be what's happened. There seems to have been some problem, and that has not been renewed. Hence, those middle-level licensees can no longer use 6 meters. And I could be wrong on that, but my understanding is that hopefully is going to get looked at again as well. But it's a strange situation for these two bands in Germany that they weren't simply allocated as permanent access, secondary access or whatever for amateurs. There are restrictions in both bands that says you have to operate horizontal polarization, 25 watts maximum, so that you ensure you don't cause any interference to the other users on the frequencies. Yeah, so certainly the 4 meter situation is, I'm fingers crossed that'll get sorted next month, but at the moment we are not allowed to operate on 4 meters in Germany. Martin, what do you think about that situation?
Well, I think it's sad, Ed, because in fairness, 4 meters is one of my favourite bands. And to be honest, you don't get hundreds of contacts on them. When you do get a contact, you get a very, very good contact of somebody who's interested and interesting to talk to. I remember being out with Chris Howard in his camper van, and he was about to pack up and go home, and he said to me, "Do you want to have a go on 4 on my ICOM 7300?" And I went, "Yeah, all right." And I put a call out. A gentleman came back to me, and it was quite, you don't often get them come straight back, but this guy came straight back to me. And the QSO went on for at least an hour. And Chris is like, "I want to go home." So what I would say is, I like the 4 meter band because you meet some very, very interesting and nice people that will give you their time. I think it's a shame that Germany has lost it for the moment. I hope you get it back. It's usually a fairly quiet band, as in noise on it. And in fairness, you don't get quite as many frequencies as us in the 4 meter allocation. We get 70 to 70.5 megs. I think you get not quite as high as that. But in fairness, it's a shame because there are not a lot of people that have got 4 meters, but it's a fantastic band. And going on to the 6 meters, yeah, well, another great band, especially in the summer. I've thoroughly enjoyed it with 6 meters. Take me Halo out, put it on a pole, and away you go. And yeah, work all over Europe on 6 quite easily, and it's great fun. And it's a shame that not everybody in Germany can use 6 meters. You know, all right, the full licenses can, but the problem is, I suppose, it doesn't matter what license you've got. You're not supposed to cause interference. If somebody's been causing interference and abusing the system, you'll lose it. And I'm finding this quite a bit strange here because I know the German population like to obey the rules. So there will be a few that don't. But it's a real shame because I think in fairness, you need to get these 2 allocations back up and working. And I think people in Germany will enjoy it, and the rest of us in Europe will enjoy working you guys. So that's where I'm going, Ed.
Yeah, just to add to the information, in Germany, when we have access to 4 meters, it's 70.150 to 70.200. So it's at 50 kilohertz only. Started back in 2018, I think, 2017, 2018. And actually, that's an increase on what we originally had. So, yeah, let's hope it gets sorted. As I said, it's 20, I think it's pretty sure it's 25 watts. And again, horizontal polarization, not vertical, and a couple of other restrictions on bandwidth, etc. So it's very much a try and see and controlled environment. And we often get, when that band opens up, which can happen, unfortunately, we tend to get interference from some of the FM broadcast stations out of Russia, who are still down around the 70 megahertz frequencies, but they're slowly moving to 88 to 108. So, yeah, let's keep hoping. It is nice that the 7300 and also the new Yaesu models, the FTDX 101s, they also come with 4 meters on them. So 4 meters is becoming fairly standard across Europe. So, yeah, it's a shame that our friends across the pond don't have access. Obviously, that frequency is allocated for some other purpose over there, and that's just the way it is. Okay, Martin, that's probably all I've got to say on this one. It's more of an announcement than a discussion point, but I will agree with you. Contacts on 4 meters do tend to be chinwags, and very nice ones at that. Back to you.
Yeah. So, in fairness, I just hope you guys get your allocations back as we move to the next news story. Okay, last news story, and this is SOTA 2026 Challenge brings back activity on 2 meters and 70 SEMS for SSB and CW. So, it's a bit different. It doesn't say you can't do FM on 2 meters or 70 SEMS, but it's kind of, they're bringing this back so that we can get up there and do a bit with different radios. So I think this is a good, interesting one. Edmund, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I have activated 2 SOTA summits in my life. The first one was on the outskirts of Dayton in 2019, and I can't remember the name of the hill off the top of my head. That was on 2 meters FM. And the second one was my local SOTA summit, Chanctonbury Ring, and you were there, Martin, in 2025, and that was on 70 centimetres FM. So no prizes for guessing what I think about the merits of doing SOTA on those bands rather than on HF. And while I think of it, coming up in February on, I believe it is the 7th, let me just double check that. Yeah, Saturday the 7th, from midday till 3 p.m, is the next edition of 145 Alive. Now, traditionally, that activity afternoon has been FM only to encourage simplex activity on that band. But in the edition coming up in February, for the first time ever, as well as the activity on the 145 megahertz section of the band, there is also going to be activity, to a lesser extent probably, but activity nevertheless, down on the 144 megahertz part of the band using vertically polarized SSB, with the idea to allow signals to go from all directions rather than beaming in particular directions using Yagis, for example. So if you wanted to combine the two, that would be a good opportunity. Another thing to bear in mind is that the Work Tool Britain group does do an award for collecting a certain number of WAB squares on VHF. I know most people do it on HF, but I know of at least one person, and that one person isn't me, who is aiming to get a certificate for doing work to All Britain on VHF. So a couple of possibilities there to combine this together. SSB and CW on 2 meters can work very well. If you're using tropospheric ducting, then there can be long and deep fades, but if you sit it out long enough, then you can usually complete the QSOs. And as long as you're not on a very high scoring summit right up in the clouds, it's not very likely that you will be above a tropospheric duct, although that can happen. So if you can get yourself up on a SOTA summit on a day when good conditions are predicted, then you may be able to do very, very well here. It's about time we went up on high ground again, Martin. What do you reckon?
Well, I do, but what you'll find nicely is if an event like this is happening all year, people will go out with 2 meters or 70 centimeters SSB. You know, I've worked from Epsom Downs, which is about 15 miles south of London, into Devon with a Yaesu 817 with going down into Devon. I had a 4-element Yagi on a pole. It wasn't that high up, I suppose, about 2 or 3 meters in the air. And so I worked a guy 5 watts SSB on 2 meters a few years back. You know, the thing is, if people are around, they'll hear you. When we used to do the SSB contest that Practical Wireless used to do, I've worked into Scotland from Epsom Downs on 2 meters and into Northern Ireland. So yeah, it's doable. And the more people on, the easier it becomes. So I think making an effort, not an effort, but making something happen, an event happen, more people will out and more people will have fun doing these other modes. But Dan, I don't do CW, so I'm going to fail on that one. But what's your thought?
Well, I like this. I just have a short comment, but I like this the idea a lot, and I think maybe POTA might think about doing something like this too. They could maybe make a certificate that awarded, that will get awarded for 10 contacts on 2 meter sideband or something, or 2 meter, even 2 meter FM would be fine. Of course, it's a little harder in parks on the air because most parks are not up, high up. That's where SOTA operators have more of an advantage because they're so high up. But yeah, it's something for POTA to think about anyway.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, in fairness, parks on the air would be interesting as well. There's no reason why you shouldn't try it. But let's pass it to our Ed Durrant. You are a mountain goat on SOTA. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, got the mountain goat a few years ago. Yeah, okay. The background to this is that every year, I think it might not have been the years of the COVID, but nearly every year, the management team of SOTA get together and look at which bands have had the least activity over the last few years. If we look to the very start of SOTA, back in 2002, a lot of I would actually consider all the majority of contacts initially were made on 2 meters portable from summit to summit and summit to chasers. So this is actually going full circle. But what they have found is while activity on FM on 2 meters in SOTA has been fairly constant and, not really any problems, the amount of SSB and CW activity on 2 meters, 70 SEMS has dropped off dramatically in the last 20 years. And hence, that was why this year it was chosen that 2 meters and 70 centimeters on SSB or CW, so not digital, not FM, would be part of this challenge. And the idea, obviously, is to get people out. And the question mark about actually Edmund touched on horizontal or vertical polarization. Horizontal is normal for sideband and CW on 2 meters, but if you've got people out there that only have a vertical antenna in some way, then you probably need to be able to do both. And the directivity things, there are also horizontal antennas that are unidirectional, things like halos. But generally, people will be taking out a small HB9CV or a 3-element Yagi or a combined satellite antenna like the Arrow or something. So they've got 2 meters and 70 centimeters. And setting themselves up for a nice session on a hilltop, on a SOTA summit. And in the UK, you've got activity nights happening on these bands. And as Edmund pointed out, also for the DX end of the band, if you like, around 144.3 for sideband and down 144.0 to, I don't know, 0.1 probably for CW, possibly higher. So, combine by all means. The other thing that's come into the picture is, as well as your FT 817, 818 and the 857s, the modern radios also come with HF and sideband for 2 meters and 70. So the ICOM 705, the Yaesu FT1D, FTX1D, the field version anyway, is also a possible radio. But on top of that, for those who don't want to spend that much, there's even a Chinese radio where you can update the firmware so that it receives sideband CW on 2 meters and 70 centimeters and transmits CW or double sideband, which isn't perfect, but as long as it's allowed under your license, that's fine. And that's one of these like $30 HTs. So it's a very cheap way of getting on the air, on the summit, and it's also something you can just throw in the backpack. The whole idea of this is to increase the activity level on sideband and CW on 2 meters and 70 centimeters. And from what I've seen so far on the SOTA cluster, this is happening around the world. So there's actually quite a bit of activity. Australia, South Korea, Japan, across Europe, UK, of course, and the US and Canada are all seeming to get on board on this as a challenge, which is what it's meant to be. So I wish everybody luck in this, and if it actually increases the activity away from just repeaters or just FM simplex to back onto the sideband and CW area of the band, which nowadays is nearly always empty, so any improvement there is good. It's a good thing to do, and whether POTA should do something similar or any of the other award schemes, why not? It would be nice. Yep, so it's a bit of nice good news to have as I think it's our last story, isn't it, today, Martin? So it's nice if some of us remember operating sideband on 2 meters years ago, and now's the time to get back on again. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, it certainly is. I used to do sideband on my FT290, 2.5 watts, years ago, about 25 years ago, but unfortunately don't own that rig anymore, but it was fun in the day. Right, that concludes our news stories, and I think that last story will be a bit of fun. Let's find out what the guys have been up to since the last time they were on the podcast, which was before Christmas, guys. Okay, Caryn, ladies first. What have you been up to?
Okay, well, Martin, we might headline this discussion or this part of the discussion, what haven't I been up to, what have I not been up to, because with the CME this week, I've certainly been up to a lot less. At Christmas, I was part of the 12 Days of Christmas event, and I activated. I had a great time. I just love that. That really makes the spirit bright. And we had finished with the Krampusnacht event, which was earlier in the month. But coming into 2026, it was a big deal because we had K3Y, the Straight Key Month event of Straight Key Century Club. I've been activating on that. And the W1AW portable event for the United States for our 250th birthday here. And for a week or so, operators in our region, Region 2, were invited to be part of W1AW Stroke 2, which I did and enjoyed that very much. So I was balancing my K3Y nights with W1AW, really getting in a lot of good CW. And I have to tell you, I think January is a terrific month for getting on the air. There's so much going on. It's winter here in this part of the world, and it's cold. It's actually too cold right now and has been for a while to even do carpota, what Ed and I refer to as plota, parking lots on the air. We just it's that cold, and I'm sorry, I'm not one who's going to run the engine on the car to stay warm. I will bring blankets, but if it's that cold, I won't even do that. Plus, you've got to get out to set up your antenna. So that part of it has been in a bit of a slump. So it's great to have these other activities going on. This coming weekend, and again, the listeners, by the time they hear this, it will be over, but there's Winter Field Day. Now, a lot of clubs in the region are doing Winter Field Day. My feeling is that if you're going to do Winter Field Day, you must suffer. You must suffer for Winter Field Day. I don't want to do it from indoors. I know that's crazy. Also not going to do it from an igloo, but I did find an organization, a local club here that's doing it in kind of an indoor-outdoor setting, and it's perfect. The location is perfect for me because it's at an equestrian center. I will not be bringing my horse. I will be driving there, and I will be operating from, it looks like it's an indoor-outdoor building, sort of a shack in the middle of a riding arena that is used at the equestrian center for horse shows. So I'm guessing, I could be wrong because I've never been there before, but I'm guessing this is where the judges sit and the horses go around and around and around. And this is a good vantage point for them to view the horses. So it's sort of an open air building, not quite a lean-to, not quite a shack, but it fulfills my requirements to run the risk of freezing to death in order to do Winter Field Day. How long I stay there depends on my tolerance for pain. I probably won't be able to wear gloves because I'm hoping to do CW. So we're once again planning on suffering a little bit here. I will bring a hand warmer, though. Finally, all of this could be moot if we have a storm. And as this podcast goes to production, there is a storm moving up the East Coast. And seeing as I'm in New York, it's possible we could have quite a bit of snow on top of the snow that we already have. So in that case, while it's perfect for Winter Field Day, it's probably dangerous to get on the road, even with an SUV that I have. Not because I don't know how to drive in that weather, but nobody else does. And I just don't want to be on the road with people slipping and sliding. So we shall see. But it's something to look forward to. I have hope that I will be able to do it Saturday. My other hope is that I see the aurora. Hope against hope, Martin. You and I are up against it for aurora watching, but there's always that chance too. That's it for me. I will send it back to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've done a lot of operating, Caryn, so that's really good fun, and I envy you in some ways, although I have got a little bit in this time. Dan, What have you been up to since we last talked?
Well, I got two stories for you. One is I've been working on updating my tech study guide, and I got I'm on this mailing list for it's called ARRL Education, and it's for teachers and stuff. And a guy posted that he had started using an AI to generate images for presentation. And I said, well, you know what? Maybe I could use that to generate more figures for my study guides. Because, doing figures is hard work, especially if you're not a graphics designer. So I was playing around with that the other day, and I come to and the first thing I tried, I said, generate me an image with a variety of resistors, because there's questions on the test about resistors, and I thought if I had a image, I could point to it and say, oh, here's some typical resistors you might find. And so I played around with it. I just never could get it to generate a realistic image. And so I've kind of given up. In fact, I have a blog post that actually should be published by the time this airs that says, AI is almost there, but still not. And that's especially for images, because what it generates is just slop, as they say. Even though Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, says we shouldn't use the word slop, it is still slop. So anyway, I don't know if I've quite given up on that, but I've kind of given up on that. If somebody knows how to manipulate AIs to generate realistic images of electronics, with an electronics theme, let me know, and maybe I'll work with them on that. The second one story is kind of not ham radio related, but it's related to the feature we did however long ago about troubleshooting thing. So I volunteered some of our ham radio guys, club members, to participate in troubleshooting sessions being sponsored by the local makerspace. And what they're troubleshooting are assistive devices for people that have trouble communicating. So there's a bunch of these assistive devices where the people who maybe cannot speak very well can just press buttons, and it will, ask people taking care of them for different things like water or help or whatever. They have these devices. They press a button, it makes a sound, and they get these devices that are basically put through the ringer. I mean, some of them get thrown across the room, so they're treated very roughly. And unfortunately, they're not designed very well. I mean, really, they're very kind of poorly designed. So they break a lot, and so the makerspace got a grant to fix these for the institutions that use them. So I volunteered a couple of our ham radio guys to go over there and fix them. And I had one the other day. We just did this Monday, and I had one that, for whatever reason, I just couldn't figure it out. And most of these are like simple fixes, really. And getting back to what I say about 80% of the electronic problems being cable or connection oriented, there was this one that I put and usually a lot of times it's just bad batteries. So I put new batteries in this one. Well, that didn't fix it. I couldn't quite. Then I took it all apart, and then I got a power supply, a separate power supply, set up for 6 volts, connected that to the terminals, and the thing turned on just fine. So I'm thinking, well, what the heck can be the case? I thought I looked at all the contacts properly, but that didn't work, and I just couldn't figure it out. So I just set it aside, and another guy picked it up. And as it turned out, it was the battery clip. There was just enough corrosion on the battery clip not to make contact, so it wasn't getting powered by the battery. And I guess I'm telling the story just to that it goes to show you that, again, most of the problems you find are connection or cable related, and I'm just glad we were able to get this one fixed. The next, I took another one that was the exact same model, and it turned on okay, but there was no sound. So I took it apart, and somehow the wire from the printed circuit board to the speaker broke. How that happened, I have no idea, but putting a new wire in there fixed the problem. So anyway, that's my story. I'd say just one other thing is that, this is something that ham radio clubs, you might think about doing as a club project, is finding somebody somewhere that might need some electronics help, like these folks at the Makerworks, which is the local makerspace, and lending your expertise. It's a good thing to do, and you've got the expertise to do it. And it's a public service, which is what ham radio is all about. And just something to think about anyway.
Well, sounds interesting, Dan. And in what I've been doing a kind of very similar role to you, but we'll catch that in a minute. Edmund, what have you been up to since last time we spoke?
Well, for various reasons, the main one being how crazily busy we've been at work, I've done hardly any amateur radio at all. I've only worked 2 stations on HF so far in 2026. Both of them were on 40 meters SSB, and both of them the call sign started with Golf Bravo 125. Now, up until a few months ago, the rules were if you had a special event call sign, it would start with Golf Bravo, followed by one number, usually, followed by a small number of letters, usually 3, sometimes 2. But Ofcom changed the rules a few months back as part of their licensing revisions upgrade, and it's now possible to apply for longer call signs. 125 years ago, in 1900, Marconi was carrying out groundbreaking experiments. So the 2 GB125 call signs I worked were India Oscar Whiskey for Isle of Wight and Lima Whiskey Sierra for Lizard Wireless Station. So throughout the year, if you are tuning around the bands and you hear a call sign that starts GB125, then it almost certainly will have something to do with commemorating Marconi's achievements 125 years ago, and will be on air from somewhere of interest. So if you hear that prefix, then it's well worth going after. In terms of what I might do in the near future, somewhere I have a 12-meter dipole that I threw together in about 5 minutes several years ago, so it could probably do with being refurbished. If Germany gets its 4-meter allocation back, I'm going to put that up, because a 12-meter dipole will work on 70 megahertz as a 3.5 wavelength antenna, and in my experience it will work very well. I've not actually worked Germany on 4 meters SSB, but I have heard them through that very antenna via Sporadic E a couple of summers back. And obviously Sporadic E is, well, sporadic, as the title would suggest. But certain parts of Germany, more so the eastern half than the western half, are very well placed geographically to be workable from the UK via Sporadic E in the summer on 4 meters. So that's definitely something I'll be trying. I'm tempted to do a SOTA activation using 2 meters SSB based on what was said earlier about the challenge for this year. If I do find a summit somewhere, I think I'll make sure that it's one that has previously been activated on 2 meters successfully. Okay, I know that just because a particular summit doesn't have previous with that band, it doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be done. It could just mean it hasn't been done. But if I can find a summit reasonably locally where there has been successful 2 meter activity in the past, then I think that would be a good starting point. And I might also try Parks on the Air on VHF. I know what Dan said about POTA locations won't necessarily be well placed in terms of height above sea level, but if you're on the coast or close to the coast, then being at sea level isn't necessarily a disadvantage. If you can transmit into a nice marine duct across to France, for example, from my location, done that quite a few times. And having height and being inland in a circumstance like that can actually be a positive disadvantage. I have a friend who was very active a few decades back on fast scan TV at 10 gigahertz, and there was a station just across the English Channel a few miles inland in France who he often used to communicate with, and he found several times that if he set up his equipment right at the water's edge, then he could work this French station on 10 gigahertz as if that station were just a few hundred yards down the road. But at the same time, if his friend also tried to work him, and his friend was portable on top of High Down Hill, which is only 82 metres above sea level, but about a mile inland, then the friend on the hill, who ostensibly was in a better position, he wouldn't be able to even detect the French station signals at all. So conventional wisdom is, yes, that height is a good thing for VHF and UHF, but it's not always the case. And the only other thing I've been doing, I've been going on the morsel.fun website, which I highly recommend most days, and I've been practicing my CW. Good news is that I can usually copy 5-letter words at 40 words per minute. Bad news is that I normally have to take about 3 or 4 attempts to do it, and I have more trouble with shorter letters than I do with longer ones. So something like the letter C or F or Z, which have got 4 dots and dashes in them, I have less trouble with than, say, the letters A or N, which only have 2 dots or dashes in them. So I'm tying my brain in knots, but it's good fun, Martin, I think. Back to you.
We'll make a CW operator out of you yet, Edmund.
Yes. For reasons I won't go into here, I have plans for 2026, and if I'm going to succeed at one of them, then knowing CW would be a distinct advantage. So yes, you will, Dan. Whether you'll make a good CW operator out of me is a different question altogether.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, so it sounds like you've been busy, and yeah, it's only you and me, Ed, now that don't do the Morse, and now you're going to tell me you do it, and I'm the only one who doesn't. But what have you been up to, Ed?
Well, I certainly haven't been up to any Morse code, no. I've tried several times to learn it, but I think the idiom that if somebody's got musical talents, they probably can learn it. But if you've got absolutely no musical talent or tone deaf or whatever, which is me, it's an uphill task. In any case, I'm committed to using the harder challenge of using sideband rather than the CW. So if you're talking about DX with the same power levels, it's easier to get it in digital. Then it's next easiest is CW and hardest is sideband. Well, actually, hardest would be AM, I guess. Anyway, doesn't matter. I stick to sideband for the time being. And yeah, what have I been doing? Well, I'm actually quite proud of a construction project I've been working on. This is a automatically band changing amplifier, 30-watt amplifier for HF. To do it, effectively, I built the logic using relays. What other people would probably put a microcontroller in and do it that way. I didn't want to do that, but I've built it using cheap Chinese modules and using relays as effectively the switching devices. And yeah, that's all working. I've just got to build it into its box now. So I'm quite happy with a little bit of construction under my belt, and started that just before Christmas. And say I've got the stage now of probably the piece that'll take the longest, which is fitting it into the box. Along with that, I've got some fault finding. I've got a intermittent fault on a portable antenna, and it's one I use on my plotter outings. So it's actually the connection to the magnetic mount. And although I've tested it at home and test it DC wise is okay, test it within an antenna analyzer, it's okay. Get out and try and use it at a Porter park, and guess what? It stops working. It's gone effectively open circuit, but get it home again and it's all fine. So I suspect it's something in the coax cable itself. Perhaps it's been trapped in the door or whatever, but it's one of those problems that when you've got the instruments there to test it, it works perfectly. So you think, okay, it's fixed, but then it goes wrong again. So one of those annoying things. Talking of Porter activations, I have done a few in the last couple of weeks. I'm slowly getting around ticking off the parks in the area that I hadn't activated yet. So did another couple of those actually on Monday before the big storm hit. And yeah, I was very lucky that I actually got out on Monday. If I'd gone out on Tuesday, I wouldn't have got any contacts. I wouldn't have got enough contacts, I don't think. And apart from that, I've got my book editing going on in the background, amateur radio books, and they're making progress. So, yeah, everything okay here. Weather's getting cold again, as I think I told you before we started the recording, Martin. And yeah, so any work I can do inside rather than outside is probably going to be what's happening between this time and the next time we get on the podcast. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, sounds like you're being busy. And Ed, don't dispel this one straight away, because I've had the problem. Chris Howard's had the problem as well. Every now and again, devices have a strange screw pitch on the PL259 or the SO239 socket. And you screw it up and it appears to go tight, but what's happened is the screws are not making a proper connection. And you may find the inner and outer are not making the connection because it hasn't screwed down enough. I'm just suggesting.
Yep. Martin, I know about that because there's actually two international standards for the thread. There's the Chinese and European, which is one standard, and there's the Japanese and American, that's a different standard. Yeah. And one combination of plug and socket will work across standards, the other one won't. That is not the problem I've got.
Okay.
Because if that was the problem I'd got, the problem would reoccur. Yeah. So no, I think it's something in the coax itself, and I'm getting to the stage now, quite honestly, for the listeners, where you say, for the value of this item, and I've got a spare anyway, do I want to spend my time trying to fix it, or do I just throw it away and use the new one? I think, Martin, you're a little bit like me, though. You don't like not fixing something, and that's probably why you go to things like repair cafes and things as well, which I think is the equivalent you're about to talk to that Dan referred to, because you get something, a good feeling out of fixing something. And I'd love to get this one sorted in the same way, and I probably will. It's just been a bit of an annoyance over the last couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're dead right. I just thought I'd throw that one in just in case. Yeah, you're dead right. I did go to the repair cafe, and it was interesting. A guy turned up with a 26-inch flat screen TV, and he said, it's dead. And just about everybody sort of disappeared on me and went, well, you're an ex-TV engineer, Martin, you fix it. I went, okay. So as Dan would tell you, you look for the simple things first. He had a dead TV. He'd had an external power supply. The power supply should have been 19 volts. It was 0 volts coming out the external power supply. So we had a look round, and 19 volts is a pretty standard voltage for a laptop power supply, and the plug and the socket looked the same. the power supply on a laptop could supply slightly more current. So we plugged this laptop power supply into it and the telly worked perfectly okay. Couldn't get the power supply apart because it had been glued and all the bits and pieces, and for safety, I couldn't have put it back together for safety reasons. So the guy's gone away and bought a new power supply, a lot cheaper than buying another telly, quite honestly. I was in Ireland doing DIY, been out and helped Colin on a couple of jobs. What you were saying, Dan, about talks, well, I've done 2 club talks over the last couple of 5 days. One was for a club in North Devon, and I did my practical fault-finding talk, which was, gives them some hints and some tips at the end. And from what I know, from the email I got back, they thoroughly enjoyed that one. So that's one I really enjoyed doing. And it kind of is expanding all the time. As I think of something else to add to the talk, I add to it, and it's growing. And that one. But the other talk I did, our Chris Howard, M0TCH, kind of, well, no, he didn't stitch me up, but it was done in fun and it was never meant to be nasty. But I did a talk for Sutton and Sheen Club, my own club, on building the QRP Labs QMX Plus, and just set it up and my first initial thoughts on it. And I start the talk and I spot sitting in the audience is Hans Summers, the owner of QRP Labs and the designer of this radio. Now, I like Hans, he's not a problem, and it all went well. I did it exactly as I would have done if he hadn't have been there. But it was a good talk, and I thoroughly enjoyed that one. And other things I've been doing, I've been on the talk group a little bit. I was also on the talk group in Ireland, although nobody seemed to come back to me when I was out in Ireland, so not a problem. Did notice Korea came up the other day, or I noticed it in the dashboard log that Korea had been on our talk group. I don't know if anybody worked them, but they were up on our talk group. And last but not least, I've been reprogramming my little Yaesu handy talkie, the FT70D. Lovely radio, but the person who designed how do you need to program it was putting up against the wall and shooting. It's a difficult radio to program. You'd never program it properly in Linux. It doesn't work out what COM port it's going to use until you're halfway through programming the thing. Doesn't even show up as a device. And the Yaesu software has a bug in the wording on the screen. So it tells you what to do, but it misses one button push. And if you don't push the button, you can't download the configuration out of the radio. And to program it, you have to download the information out of the radio, alter it, and then program it up again. You can't just take a Virgin radio and say, push this into the radio. I've got this file, put it into the radio. It goes, no. So it's a strange one. Mine's working now, so I'm happy, but did take me a little while to get past those couple of little bits and pieces. So apart from a couple of talks at the repair cafe, as I say, I did fix a couple of powered loudspeakers at the repair cafe. It just required capacitors changing. Took them apart, and the person had bought some electrolytics, and I fitted them, and that killed the hum. They were bulging, so that's now done. And by the time I do next podcast, I'll have probably done another repair cafe, so that's keeping me busy. Right, all that's left for me to do now is to thank the guys for turning up and coming along, which has been great. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
Well, my pleasure. Another great episode.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'd like to thank Caryn Eve Murray KD2GUT.
Thank you, Martin, for keeping it fun.
I try. I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG.
Thanks for having me on, Martin.
No problems. And last but not least, I'd like to thank my good buddy over there in Germany, Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And something I meant to say in my little piece, I think on behalf of all of us, thanks to all the listeners that actually put an entry into the survey. We have had a meeting internally on that, and some very good suggestions. And I think there's something gone out in the newsletter from Colin about that. But my personal thanks anyway to everybody who took the time to do the survey. It is appreciated.
Yeah, certainly was. And the one person who said I should retire, Colin's not going to let me, unfortunately. Anyway, thanks for doing the podcast. Right. 73, guys, and I'll move to the next part of the podcast. 73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.ICQPodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.ICQPodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. News here that the FCC's approval in December of the 60-metre frequency changes take effect from the middle of February. And these are to coincide with amateur allocations made at the World Radio Communications Conference 2015. Now, there are lots of bits and pieces in there that are changes, so do check your band plan, etc. But the big part is there's a confusing part. The existing 60-metre channel centred on 5332, 5348, 5373 and 5405 kilohertz. They remain as secondary amateur allocations with a maximum power of 100 watts ERP. However, the old channel at 5358.8 kHz is eliminated and is now part of the new 5351.5 to 5366.5 kHz subband and subjected to lower power limits. So say well worthwhile checking out the band plan to make sure you don't fall foul. But good news to say that there are more frequencies coming available, as I say, for the middle of February. There is call for registration has been open for Maritime Radio 2026. This event being held on the 14th and 15th of April is organised by the Radio Officers Association, and the idea is to get radio operators, both seagoing and coastal stations, contacting each other and exchanging signal reports on the amateur bands using Morse code. It's open to all friends of the day, the Maritime Radio Day, and it's not a competition. It's just basically a friendship and a working operation and highlighting the hobby day. So certainly one of good interest there. So if you can help out in any way, we'll put the link to this for you on the ICQ Podcast webpage for you, and you can help out from there. The American Red Cross has many new powerful tools in its repertoire to assist communities in distress, and now due to a silent key amateur from Arizona, it's going to add amateur radio. The legacy of Jack Lunsford, November Tango 7, Mike, is going to help save lives. Jack, who's been a member of the North Arizona DX Association, became a silent key before Christmas. And his daughter presented his beloved Kenwood radio to the DX Association. Hope we continue its mission of communication and goodwill. And I say the Red Cross as well will be benefiting as well from that work as well. So again, they're basically passing on his general legacy from there. Denny Presler, KC3 Delta Tango Bravo, is quote saying, ham radio provides emergency broadcasts when everything is down. They are more powerful than portable radios and can be used to communicate around the globe. Lately, there's been a resurgence of ham radio with wildfires and other disasters, and this hardware will help us out from there. So it's a lovely story there about Jack's legacy and his interest in amateur radio continue to help others after his passing. Right, then we're going to go over to our features episode, and our feature is on expanding port operations on 77s and 2 meters. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now for this episode's feature from the ICQ Podcast.
Hi guys, for this feature I wanted to talk about VHF or UHF operating portable. Now I thought this was worth covering because our last news story about the SOTA events of people using 2 meters and 77s might just help others get on board. Now, I'm not saying go out and do the SOTA sites. There's lots you can do, VHF and UHF. So, first thing is you've got to pick a site. Well, we all know as high as possible, because VHF and UHF is pretty much line of sight. Maybe just over the horizon, but pretty much line of sight. You want to be away from background noise. So if you're living in a town, if you can get out into a park somewhere just outside of town, chances are the background noise will be a lot quieter. Look for a location that's got facilities. Does it have an on-site cafe, a burger van, toilets, that sort of thing? Because if you're going to be there for a fair amount of time, you might need some of the facilities. Check the cost of parking. You know, where you're going, is it going to cost you a fortune to park there? Some car parking costs can be exorbitant. Others are free. So check on that. Also, check the bylaws before you start drilling holes in the ground or thumping holes in the ground. Check the bylaws. I haven't came across a problem like this where we were about to set up an antenna, read the bylaws and it said you mustn't puncture the ground. So I contacted the rangers, and the rangers understood and were very polite and glad I'd rung them, and actually suggested where I could put the antenna up, puncturing the ground, which they knew wasn't sacred ground and likely to have skeletons and fossils in it. So, in fairness, you know, if you're polite, things happen. The other thing is, are you in range of multiple repeaters? Because in fairness, if the whole thing goes dead quiet, if you've got 3 or 4 repeaters that you can't work from home, you might be able to work quite a few people on repeaters. Now, I know that's not technically DXing or whatever, but, you know, you're going out to have a bit of fun. So you've got to pick a mode which you're going to operate. Now, you're not going to do AM, although a lot of the modern rigs will actually do AM. That's pretty much wasted time. You might want to do FM, and if you're going to do FM, that's not going to stop you. Away you go. Don't let anybody put you off. Single sideband. Yeah, well, we can do single sideband on VHF, UHF, depending on your rig. You can also do digital data, which, there's various ways you can connect a small computer or a tablet up and do digital data. Or you could do digital voice and see what happens. You could put calls out in a digital mode, or you could connect to a repeater that's connected via internet and work that. But that's all fun. So that's modes. You pick your mode. Now let's pick a rig. Well, if you're new to the hobby, chances are you've got a handy-talkie, or a walkie-talkie as we call them in the UK. Nothing wrong with that. It's about going out and having fun. And some of these little radios are very, very nice and work very, very well. Going back in history a little bit, the Yaesu used to have an FT290, which was a multi-mode rig, ran about 2.5 watts. They also had an FT480, which I believe is 10 watts, 2 meters, 10 watts. And ICOM produced a radio called an ICOM IC706. Now, nicely, and they're all very, very good radios, but they're all quite long in the tooth now. And the problem you're likely to have is that they may start needing repair work doing on them, or bringing back up to standard. So unless you know what you're doing, I would kind of say these are past their best. Now, if you've got one and you've kept it running, please use it, because there's nothing wrong with them. It's just they may be a little bit low spec these days. Yaesu also produced the FT817. I own one of those. And also they upgraded it to an FT818, which is pretty much the same radio. They obviously had to change a few components inside, and they got fractionally more power out of it, but not something that's going to set the world alight. Lovely little radio, works QRP. Okay, the Yaesu FT857. Whereas it's a good little radio and quite small mobile, I think the problem you're going to run into this one is when you're running off battery, it's going to use far more battery power than the 817. So you're going to need a much bigger battery, but there's no reason why you shouldn't use one. Also, ICOM produce the ICOM 705, lovely QRP rig, and that will work very, very well. And Yaesu have just released their FTX-1 series, and some nice rigs in there. So you got plenty of chance to do it, from the cheapest handy-talkie option right up to one of the premier rigs from one of the premier manufacturers. Picking an antenna. Well, if you've got your handy-talkie, or walkie-talkie as we call them in the UK, you've got a rubber duck on it. Now, that's not a very efficient antenna, but you can improve the range with a rubber duck with a very, very small fix. One piece of wire. If you have an antenna that unscrews off the top of your radio, you can fit one of these eyelet screw adapter things over the top of it and solder on a bit of wire to it. It's like a washer with a tag on. Solder a bit of wire onto it, a quarter wave long. And with a quarter wave long piece of wire, you'd be surprised how far that goes off your rubber duck. I used to work down the country a little bit. One of the repeaters I used to get into, I could just about make it into the repeater from the work location. Put the wire on, and I was in 5 and 9. So, don't dispel handy-talkie. Could be very useful. Next thing is coax dipoles, or verticals. Now, if you've got a piece of coax and you're only out for a short period of time, you get a piece of coax, you split the inner and outer, and you make sure that the inner and outer are effectively a quarter wave. You will have to tune this, but you make them a quarter wave. Now, if you're making it a vertical, you make sure that the inner is going straight up and the outer, the braid, is straight down. You'll find that that's effectively a vertical dipole, and you'll be able to use that. Quite light if you aren't travelling by car and you have to carry it. And in fairness, I've done 70-80 miles on one of those with an FT290, so they do work. And I shouldn't be telling you this, but a colleague of mine screwed up when he was doing a commercial installation, and I was with him. He forgot to take the antenna for the customer, and he was panicking what we're going to do. I made a 70 SEMS version of that particular antenna, and this building site run for a week on a piece of coax acting as a vertical antenna in central London until he went back with a proper antenna. And so that's a useful thing. You can make them a just a piece of coax. Now, some of us have arrow antennas or alpha antennas, which we've tried to do satellite work, and satellites are great fun. But they can also be used either on a hand, holding in your hand and pointing in the direction, or you can put them on a small pole, and they're great fun. Once again, the dipole, a 2-metre dipole isn't that long. The 70 SEMS dipole is phenomenally small. You're not struggling to find masses of height and strong areas to hold it up. So a little bush somewhere may just be enough to hold them up. And, don't forget, you have mobile mounts, so you can use your mobile on the car, or mount the antenna on the top of the car and use a mobile antenna on the top. It's all about having fun and doing it the best way you want to. If you really seriously about VHF and vertical polarization, you could also use a collinear. They work very, very well. One antenna I've not tried is a slot antenna. So a vertical slot, I believe, has horizontal polarization. Well, if you're going to make a slot antenna, then they're not massive, and they'll go in the car without taking up lots of space, and that's something I will play with at some point in time. But lastly, don't forget you can get halos for 2 meters and 70 cents. Now, 70 cents halo is so small it's hardly noticeable. The 2 meter one ain't much bigger, in all honesty, but they are horizontally polarized if they're set up that way, and omnidirectional. So, a little useful when you're out and about. Now, logging and advice. Now, this is not me talking down to you, but you probably want to log your calls just to see how well you did that afternoon. And if you've got a small computer or tablet and you're in your car, fine business, they quite work well. I actually like paper logging because I scrawl and scribble all sorts of notes on the paper while I'm having the contact with the person. And I've got pre-printed sheets I made up to do that. And they're pretty easy to do. You just put all the things you want to know down and information you want to give the other person, and you fill it in as you're going along. Introduction cards for the general public. I have some introduction cards that I give to the general public. Now, if you're out operating, there's a chance that somebody's going to come up to you and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" Be nice, be polite, it pays dividends. But at the end of it, I usually give them a little card that says, "I'm an amateur radio operator. This is my call sign. This is my email address. If you want to find out more about it, I can obviously put you in touch with people in your area if you're not in mine." And a few nice links like National Society, your particular radio club, and in my case, I put the ICQPodcast on it and give it to the person, and away they go quite happily. I would suggest, if you can, put out a small sign. It doesn't have to be massive, maybe on your windscreen of your car, so that if the person doesn't come up to you, it just says amateur radio operating here. It saves you a lot of aggravation of them calling the authorities and saying there's a spy operating, and that does happen, trust me. But it also gives them the opportunity to come across and they don't feel complete idiots when they ask you questions because they know it's an amateur radio station. I would suggest take a copy of your licence and also take a copy of your band plan with you. You know, the band plan's quite useful. You won't remember everything all the time, so have a copy of the band plan. And if you do take a computer or a little tablet, it's a good idea to download the manual onto the device or take a paper copy. You know, if you've got a copy of your manual, you might have to look up something you've forgotten how to use. These modern radios have so many buttons and knobs on them and menus that sometimes you forget how to do something. Now, lastly, items to make your operating more enjoyable. Well, number one, look after yourself. You know, don't do anything silly. Number two, take some suntan lotion. I'd also suggest you get yourself a small table and chair if you're going to be operating outside. You know, if you've got one of these fold-up chairs, they're more comfortable than sitting on the ground. And, you know, it gets you out of the car and it gives you more elbow room. So a small folding table and chair are quite good. I'd also suggest you take a first aid kit. Very, very important. You never know. You could cut yourself or whatever, put plaster on a bit of antiseptic cream. Certainly going to help you. I mean, I'm not talking about a major medical kit, but just a small one. Another thing I do is take a flask of hot water with me. Now, you could take hot water, coffee or tea. I take hot water because if I'm out with somebody else, I have coffee sachets and I tip it in the cup, tip the water on it. If they want tea, I've got tea bags, and away we go. So cups, milk and sugar can be very useful if you are to take milk or sugar. And one of the other things I would suggest is, when you're out and doing this, take a small toolbox with you or a selection of small tools. You never know when you're going to need it. Take a little bit of extra wire rolled up into a little spool, just in case you need to do something else or change a radiating wire while you're out. And take some different type connectors, because you will need to potentially change connectors. Now, last thing I will say is Guys, remember, if you're on 2 meters or 70 sems, RJ58 or RJ58 is no use to you. It's no good above 10 megahertz. So unless you're only running a couple of meters of this coax, then you might get away with it. Once you go over a couple of meters of it or so, 2-3 meters, you're starting to take a lot of loss in the cable. And if you're operating QRP, you don't want any loss. So good quality cable. Try and pick a cable that works well up at the frequencies you want to use. Now, I hope this was of interest. And all I will say now is, if you fancy going out and doing VHF, UHF, portable operation, have some fun. It's all right. And those who haven't got HF rigs, you can do this. Those who have, give it a try sometime. I hope this was of interest.
Well, everybody, as always, I really hope our feature this episode is sort of got you thinking about portable operations on 70 sems and 2 meters. And certainly, as I say, there's a lot to be done in those bands when you're out and about. It's not just about the big bands. As I say, you can do a lot of cool stuff there. I remember, Dad, our first trip to Dayton Hamvention. Our friend and colleague Edmund was doing all sorts of weird stuff with his handy talkie and some sort of new magical antenna he picked up the day before at the show, and was out performing all sorts of rigs around him. So it just proves the fact that it's all about the right kit, the right time, and the right bands. You can do some interesting stuff.
Yeah, you can, Colin. And the other thing is, I'm hoping that now SOTA, there will be people out on summits using VHF and UHF. The thing it always is these signals go a lot further than most people give them credit for. And if there are people on the bands, you will have great fun. But if there's nobody on the bands, it's hard work. And the problem is, don't just sit and listen, call CQ. Because, chances are there'll be loads of people listening, but not operating. A classic example is, I called CQ on the 2 meter calling frequency in London. It had been dead for about 10 hours. I called and I spoke to somebody and we forgot to move off the calling channel. By the second over, half of London was shouting at us to get off the calling frequency. But nobody else using it.
Yeah.
So the thing is, loads of people listen, very few people actually transmit. So if you're out and it looks like a dead band or dead quiet, put a few calls out. You never know what's going to come back.
Exactly. Feedback. So last episode we were talking about Starlink lowering satellites in their orbital area to reduce risk of collision, and someone dropped a note on our news story. So the SpaceX was recently granted authorization by the FCC to operate an additional 7,500 new Starlink satellites, bringing their constellation up to 15,000 satellites. Movement of some satellites to a lower orbit could prevent potential competitors from putting forward their proposal constellations and create an additional room for even more Starlink satellites. So hopefully the FCC is ensuring that there can be competition there. But as I say, those that utilise Starlink, and the more and more people you hear are getting it, as I say, have more access to more satellites. So thanks for that piece of feedback there. As always, you can drop us a line on feedback on news stories or the show, etc., either by adding those to the individual news stories or the episodes pages on ICQPodcast.com, or sending us a email from the contact us page and popping that through to us, and we'd be grateful for that feedback from you. Now, we teased at the start of the show, we got two announcements coming this part of the show for you. So first off is digital talk group nets. So these were requested in a listener survey, and we'd like to announce our next two that are coming up. So this will be held on Saturday the 7th of February between 0800 and 1200 UTC. And then also going in March on the 7th of March, Saturday 7th of March, and that'll be 1300 to 1700 UTC. More information and the whole year's schedule is available on ICQPodcast.com, and you can check out, those plans from there. But just to confirm, 7th of February, 7th of March is the next Digital Talk Group Nets, where you can chat to fellow ICQ podcast presenters and listeners on the Digital Talk Group Nets there. So hope you guys can join us there. Our second big announcement is, again, another piece of feedback from the listener survey is to get listener Q&As with our manufacturers, and we're delighted to announce our first one will be with QRP Labs. So Hans Summers will be available to take your questions. So what we're going to ask is submit your questions for Hans, and the best ones we're going to put forward to him, and record that as a feature for you. Best way of getting in contact for that is to, go to the contact page on ICQPodcast.com, pop your question to us, and we'll work out the best ones and pop those forward for Hans to answer from there. So QRP Labs, Hans Summers, if you've got a question about, the QRP Labs products, or any portable ops, low power type of operations, Hans is your man to ask that question to. And I know that we're looking forward to that one, because Hans is not only a very interesting guy but extremely knowledgeable, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer loads of queries that our listeners have.
I'm sure he will, Colin, and as I say, we're working in the right direction on that, I think. So we will ask other manufacturers to join us on this. So if you are working for a manufacturer, don't think we've left you out. We have to start somewhere, and seeing as I was actually in contact with Hans a couple of weeks ago, I thought we'd grab him quick while we could. So that's the reason.
Yeah, and also all the work he's doing with polar modularization as well is well worth hearing more about as well. So certainly looking forward to Hans being with us for that Q&A, and certainly guys, it's really up to yourself. You know, the quality of the questions, the goodness of the questions, etc. Will allow us to embrace other manufacturers as well on this as well for you. So yeah, looking forward to that one, and we'll certainly that'll be hopefully a good one from there. Right, well, we need to thank our colleagues that took part in the News Roundtable with your dad. So Dan, KB6 Uniform, Caryn, KD2 Tango, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, and Edmund, DD5 Lima Papa. Thank you very much, guys, for taking part in the News Roundtable and sharing your views and opinions, and hopefully generating some ideas for people from there. We'd, of course, like to thank our monthly and subscription donors that, give us a base and pay away, and also like to thank as well Jeremy Reese, November 8 Yankee Papa, and John R. Stengel, Whiskey 8 Uniform Charlie, for their one-off donations as well. If you've got value from the ICQ podcast today, and you want to show that value, we ask you to go to ICQPodcast.com/donate, where you can send that value back to us in a financial amount that's suitable for you and your levels, etc. And all those donations go towards our running costs and keeping us advert free and keeping the improvements going in the show. So guys, please do consider showing your support for the show. Right, well, I think that's about everything we've got there, Dad, on our run list this today for episode 475 of the ICQ podcast. Last thing to do, of course, is to make Mrs. B a nice cup of tea and have a rummage around that cupboard, and hopefully there's still some treats floating around there that you can share with her a cup of tea.
Certainly will, Colin. I'll make your mum a drink in a minute and find something nice. However, what you just said there, keeping us advert free, you may think, well, why do we do it? Well, in fairness, we tell it like it is. If we were boxed into a area where we had to take advertising, we would have to give you the manufacturer's BS. So in fairness, we tell it like it is, an honest and truthful discussion. And I know a lot of you appreciate that. And number two, please sign up and look out for the newsletter. It does help you. There are some interesting changes, I believe, happening fairly soon, but carry on looking out for our newsletter. It gets you ahead of the game plan. And when it arrives, open it. Don't just leave it in your folder. So that's enough from me, Colin. Back to you.
That's perfect there. So, guys, we're Bidgel 73s. We'll keep working for you in the meantime in the next fortnight, and we'll look forward to catching up with you all again in a fortnight's time. 73s all.
Yeah, 73.